Welcome to Joey Jackson on the Law. Hi, this is Joey Jackson on the Law, and today we are talking all things Epstein. Now, why are we doing that? Epstein has become a significant thing, particularly in the United States, where inquiring minds want to know. Now, interestingly enough, Epstein has been dead for a number of years. He killed himself, if you believe that narrative, in prison in 2019. Or perhaps he was murdered in prison, or perhaps he's in the witness protection program. You can engage in whatever conspiracy theory you wish to engage in. However, Epstein is a critical issue. It's critical even though he's dead, and again, having died at 66 years old in August of 2019. Now, there's probably a number of reasons why Epstein is so significant even in his death. And let me pose a few to you right now. Epstein is a person who was known for abusing multiple young girls as young as 14 years old over the course of years, decades. Some have estimates as in as much as 1,000 girls that he abused over that course of time, depending upon what you look at. Now, that resonates with so many people. The fact is that he was a billionaire financier, and he used his money in a way in which it was very degrading to people, to women, to young girls who came before him. Now, how did he get these young girls? It's alleged that he got these young girls because they were recruited and they were enticed, and each young girl would bring another young girl, and he gave them more money than they ever would otherwise have. But why does this seem, the Epstein files, right, bring shockwaves among so many people? Well, I'd argue again that there's a number of reasons. The first thing is I think people can relate to the fact that no girl at 14, 15, or underage or prepubescent should be in any way abused. And I think that people, as a result of that, can really see, and it really rips people apart to believe that you have a person who's using their money and abusing their money to engage in such conduct that they're degrading others. And so I do believe that people, it hits you like emotionally, that you think about what this person is doing. The second thing is relating to the first. And that is that not only is he abusing these girls, but he's using the money that he has in order to do it. Now you can argue he was a philanthropist, you can argue he did and he donated to causes, but the reality is that he was using his money for things that were horrifically bad, illegal, degrading, irresponsible, and certainly something that should not ever be done in a civilized society. I think the other reason is because there's a notion that people who are rich and powerful get away with it all. The fact is that money shouldn't be the denominator that makes a person get out of anything, but in his situation, he did. And the fact is that you can look at also his associates. There are big names associated with him, and that's why the Epstein files, people want to know who's contained in that. Now, you've heard the name Bill Clinton brought about that. You've heard about Prince Andrew. There are a variety of other people, Elon Musk, etc. Now, in suggesting and giving you those names, I'm not saying that they're guilty of anything, but certainly there were associations with him, and that's noted in the files. You heard about Donald Trump and his association with Jeffrey Epstein. Again, what, if any, illegality anybody engaged in is an open question. But I think that people want transparency. And that's also another reason why people are enamored with these Epstein files in terms of their release. They're enamored with them because they want to know, who are these people around him? What did they know, and when did they know it? Did they enable him in any way? If they enabled him in any way, then certainly there should be some type of accountability. And so when you look at the issue of Epstein and you look at over the course of the years, what he's alleged to have done. Now, I'm not going to get in the specifics of exactly what was happening, but I do want to give you some measure. This is a person who's accused of literally having places all over the world. He was so resourced that he had, as we know, place in New York, place in Florida, has an island in the Virgin Islands. He would travel to Europe, was just all over. Had a private jet, had a private plane is a jet, of course, helicopter, just so much money to do whatever he needed to do. And so again, why should people who are resourced like that live in a different type of way than anyone else, having all these powerful associations? But I think the other issue is why is it when you look at these Epstein files that it's taken so long for it to come to this? The government had been investigating him for years and years and years. So when you have a person who has this amount of wealth, when you have a person who has this amount of associations, when you have a person who has all of these people that can vouch for him and know him, etc., who enabled him to do what and when, and to what extent should they be held accountable? And I think that after all, is the issue of the day. In the release of the Epstein files, as they will get to Jeffrey Epstein, we want to know, inquiring minds want to know exactly what was going on. Who's in those logs? Who's in those files? Who was on that plane? Who were in court documents? Who are these young victims? Not who, they'll be redacted, meaning that we're not going to know specifically. And a lot of them have come forward since. But the reality is that this is something that we need, and that is transparency. And that's the fascination with the Epstein files. So we know as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein that which is done in the dark comes out in the light. But here's the issue. The issue is that they were onto, that his authorities were onto him way back in 2005 and 2006. There was an investigation occurring in Florida, and in that investigation, there were literally dozens of young victims as young as 14 who allegations were that he was engaging in this inappropriate behavior. And as it were, the allegations were that he was literally having people associated with him who knew what he was up to. And of course, we know he was wealthy enough to have a housekeeper. He had a driver. He had a butler. He had all of those people who were there. And he also had Ghislaine Maxwell. We'll talk about her later. Ghislaine Maxwell is someone who was involved in a long-term relationship with him. But apparently he had a penchant. He had a drive. He was a person who just wanted these young girls. And so he would want these massages. He would invite these young girls to his home, and he would ask for a massage. He would get naked. He would do inappropriate things with them. He would use sex toys and other things, and it was quite frankly disgusting. And as a result of that, there was an investigation when people were tipped off as to his conduct that began in the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, interviewed many of these victims, and in interviewing many of these victims, they learned, and it was corroborated, supported, specifically what he was doing and who he was doing it with. And not only would he get these girls to say, okay, what do you want to do in life? I want to be a singer. Don't worry, I'm Jeffrey Epstein. I'll make sure you get a singing contract. What do you want to do in life? I want to be a professional. Oh, I'll pay for your schooling. What's the matter with you? So he would treat them in such a way where he would use his money in order to have them do what he wanted them to do. And these young girls being handed $200-$300 bills every time they came over to engage in a massage with him, they would just, they were smitten. And he would take advantage of these young girls, many of whom came from broken homes, many of whom didn't know better, and many of whom just didn't have the resources, to know otherwise. And he was assisted and enabled, as the allegations were, and later she would be convicted. Ghislaine Maxwell would help him do this. Now, the bottom line is, if the government knew this, why didn't they stop him when they had their opportunity? Well, I'm going to tell you what happened. What happened is that the state of Florida not only engaged in an investigation, but they whitewashed the investigation. Although they had literally dozens of young girls who they had knowledge that he engaged in this with, they ended up taking the case to a grand jury. That's a group of people who decide whether or not that you're guilty, but there's reason to believe that you committed a crime. There was a state grand jury investigation. That doesn't happen really from the state level. In Florida, they do it another way, but with the exception of certain cases. But they took his case because he's Jeffrey Epstein. And what they did, even though they had dozens and dozens and dozens of girls, is he ended up pleading guilty later to one count of solicitation of prostitution. You heard me. That means solicitation of prostitution means that it was an adult. And then he pled guilty to one other count, and that other count was procuring of a minor for prostitution. 2 counts, dozens of victims, but it doesn't stop there. What ended up happening was the federal government undertook an investigation as well, and they signed what's called a non-prosecution agreement. In that non-prosecution agreement that nobody else gets, it said that he would be given immunity. and they hid it from the victims. They literally signed this secret non-prosecution agreement saying that he couldn't be prosecuted ever again, nor could any of his associates be prosecuted ever again. He got this sweetheart deal from the United States Attorney's Office, and he didn't even plead to a federal crime. They literally had a 60-count indictment involving these women that was a draft that they never presented, nor did they never pursued or followed through with. And so therefore, they said, okay, we're going to hush it. We're going to get this non-prosecution agreement. You're going to plead to these state-level felonies, and we'll register you as a sex offender. You'll do 18 months in jail, and no one would be the wiser. And when the victims learned about the prosecution agreement in 2008, they were livid because they were not even notified he was in fact protected by the United States government because of his wealth. And the United States attorney at the time, Acosta, who approved the deal, had some explaining to do. And it doesn't end there. Not only did they let him go with a slap on the wrist and 18-month jail, and I should mind you that other people who were having the same offenses got life sentences or the minimum of 10 years, but he's Jeffrey Epstein. And not only did he get this 18-month sentence, but he got work release where he was able to go home 6 days a week. You heard me. And his sentence, even though he was going home 6 days a week or to his office 6 days a week, anywhere but the jail, what would end up happening would be is that he served 13 months at the end of the day, not even his entire sentence. And it was all hushed. It was swung under the rug. No one knew anything about it. And he got away with it again so that he could continue to engage in this behavior. So the question becomes, if the state had him and the feds had him, why did they let him go such that he could continue to abuse people? Why did he get 13 months and he was allowed to go home when other people accused of the same thing were literally put underneath the jail? And so that's the other issue, and that's an issue with our system as to why other people who are resourced get to do what they want when you're a billionaire, but when you're not a billionaire, you're buried underneath the jail. And so I think inquiring minds want to know what this deal's all about, what it contains, and part of this whole Epstein file is a re-looking at that. Now, last point, that is, they investigated this, and investigating this, they determined that the prosecutors did not act properly. Nothing criminal, but at the same time, there was improper action. That is a sham, and people are really concerned about it. So little did Jeffrey Epstein know that when he was given this sweetheart deal in Florida, both at the state level and the federal level, remember in Florida, they were coordinating, that is the state and the federal government, to hide this from the victims, to allow him to plead guilty to things that were completely different from the things he was doing, to disregard the victims, which are the little girls and what they had to say. Little did he know that this non-prosecution agreement that he signed in 2007 would be meaningless. And why do I say that? Because the Southern District of New York undertook a prosecution of him and an investigation in 2019. And in 2019, he was arrested and he was detained. He was given no bail. And so Jeffrey Epstein, who has been sleeking out of things all of his life and using his money and resources and his connections, all at his disposal, his famed legal team, which included all the names. Ken Starr, he's the guy who, you remember, independent counsel for Bill Clinton. Alan Dershowitz, everybody knows him. Gerald Lefcourt, Roy Black, all of these famed attorneys who were assisting him back in the day. What ended up happening is that now he's in front of the Southern District facing an indictment. Now, to be clear, an indictment includes going to the grand jury, which consists of 23 people. A simple majority, that is 12, have to vote out an indictment. An indictment says that there's reason to believe, number one, that a crime was committed, and number two, you committed it. And so that's what they did, the Southern District of New York in 2019. And the charges he was facing were conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, I'll explain, in addition to sex trafficking itself, I'll explain. And so what ends up happening is that the biggest explanation I could give you is those are lifetime felonies that you could spend the rest of your life in jail. So what ended up happening is they go and they arrest him. in arresting him, he now has some explaining to do, and the explaining he had to do was with regard to conspiracy to engage in sex trafficking. What's that? Well, first, the issue of conspiracy. Conspiracy means that there was an agreement between two or more people, and in the indictment, that's the allegation, 14 pages, what they said essentially was that he was using his staff, his employees, to engage in this conspiracy to entice these underage girls to come to his home. Sex trafficking. They were flying everywhere, right? Flying all over the place to meet him in Manhattan. And they had various victims. They're not named, of course. You want to protect these young girls. They were young women at that time in 2019. But the allegation is that they were traveling in interstate commerce, one state to another, in other instances, a country to another, in order to visit him to get these massages. Again, disgusting, in which he would, not the massage itself, right? People get massages, but when they involve 14-year-olds who are partially nude or completely nude, when they involve sex toys, where they involve him pleasuring himself, I'll stop there because his staff is really taking these little girls to him. And then again, what he was doing was he was paying the girls to go get other girls. And so finally, with the Southern District of New York catching up to him, they said, this is no bueno. We got you. And in getting you, we're going to hold you accountable for engaging in this conspiracy agreement with your staff to have people come, little girls come from all over the place to visit you in Manhattan to engage in this activity. And so as a result of that, and they have instances, Florida is also named in the indictment, his activities there. And that's one allegation. The second count involves the sex trafficking itself, right? And the sex trafficking itself is, again, when you go through interstate commerce, one state to one state, right? Somewhere outside the United States, into the United States, whatever, because he was flying all over, in Europe when he was coming back. But these girls were coming to see him, having been recruited not only by his employees, but by other girls. And so now he was held accountable. Interesting thing. The interesting thing is that there's also in that indictment forfeiture allegations. So now he's being held accountable. Not only is he now, which he should have been when he was in Florida, when they got him in Florida and started investigating in 2005 and 6, held accountable, he wasn't. But you know what? I said it before. That which you do in the dark comes out in the light. And if you're going to engage in wickedness and evilness, eventually the king falls. And the king was falling. And so he was brought into court to answer for these crimes. And what ended up happening with the forfeiture allegations is we won't know in terms of his estate being forfeited, but in the event he would have been convicted of those crimes, everything that you earn in furtherance of those activities is taken away from you. And so the accountability was finally here. And in terms of going back to the conspiracy, in order to do that, you have to show that there were activities, what they call overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Overt acts like what? Well, how about calling and scheduling these girls to be here? How about getting other people and enticing the girls you had to get other people? How about having these actual massages from these girls? A lot was going on. And so while the noose was closing in, apparently he was feeling a certain kind of way. And as a result of that, he died in jail. Now, was it a suicide? Was it in fact a murder? Was it in fact he's in some foreign country? I don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But justice finally came about, and many would argue an injustice because he took the easy way out. They wanted to see him on trial. In any event, may the law be with you. Visit me at joeyjacksonlaw.com. Don't forget the www in order to see me, find me, ask me questions, and learn any more.